Hello everybody, BanditBrains here and welcome back to another Valheim video. Today we're going to jump straight back into where we left off with the castle, so without wasting any more time, let's get into it. So to start with, I began by building up the gates and the walls of these walls so that I knew what sort of height I had to work with. You may also notice the little outcropping balcony that I have there on the left. It was something I did off camera and it's something that I add to, so you'll see me develop that as we go along. To begin with, these walls look very plain and boring, but it's something I tackle as we get further into the episode. I quickly realized that in order to get depth and detail into these walls, I needed to make them double thick, but you'll see that later on anyway. Finally, once the walls are at a height that I wanted them to be, I decided to flatten out the area in front of where I imagined the door was going to be. I wasn't sure how I was going to do the door just yet, but I knew there needed to be a flat area for the player to walk up onto. Once I had begun doing this, my imagination kind of ran off and I decided to start making the stairway up to where the door was going to be, and this turned out pretty cool. I put a little curve in it and I think that added a lot of detail. I made it kind of a bit more special than just a boring straight staircase up to the doorway. For some reason I was starting to get some mad Helm's Deep vibes, even though it was like nowhere near that scale. But I have said before that I think level changes is what makes a build feel so much more in depth and big in scale, so having a level change up to the entrance of the building really worked here, I think. To finish off the stairway for now, I added a handrail and encased the stairs in, and then I continued the wall up to the flat area up top so that it all tied together and started feeling like one structure. Then I tidied up the balcony by continuing the wooden accent around the edge of the balcony and then adding the handrail across the full length of it. I really started to enjoy this part of the build because for so long I've been doing the big structures like the walls and the towers that I was able to start changing things up and changing some of the finer details that I'd gotten used to. And I started experimenting with using the items in different ways that I hadn't done before. Like this doorway, for example. At this point I decided that the door was going to be against this wall, so I started by removing the bricks and the gates to see how it would affect the structure, and then framed it out with the wooden beams. Then I used wooden walls at an angle to make this kind of open door effect that the player could just walk through without having to open the door, and it would be a more grander entrance. I even put this tiny little door handle on it to give it a bit more detail. Then I realized this is just a tiny doorway with a little handle on. It's not a grand entrance at all. So I moved on to the wall next to it and moved things up a gear by carving out a much bigger entrance that I was going to start experimenting with. It took a little bit of time. I made it a bit smaller than the original plans because I thought it was a bit over the top. But I eventually settled on the size of the door and I started framing it out with the wooden beams. And then I repeated the wooden wall effect by turning them at an angle to make it look like an open door. And then I framed them out with wooden beams as well to make it look like a strong wooden door. I also altered the flat area in front of the door, as you saw then, just to make it so that it made a little bit more sense. You wouldn't have the door opening onto stairways straight away. There would be at least a little bit of a flat area. Then I bricked up the old small door because it just paled in comparison, but that's not before I moved the little door handles back onto the main door, and also added a little bit of detail on the wall to kind of frame the door. Moving on now to the inside of the castle, I removed the gates from the doorway to make it so that you could actually walk through. It was a bit sketchy. I wasn't sure how the stability was going to be affected, but everything seemed to be fine, so I moved on to making the walls double thick. Unfortunately, the camera angle and the snow made this a bit hard to see, but I basically made a second layer of gates going up the height of that main wall and then just repeated a second wall right behind the first one with the 2x1 stone walls. So hopefully you can see the progress that I'm making in the back there. I've nearly made the second wall to the height of the first wall, and then I can move on to adding the details like the windows. Once the second wall was done, I knocked through a hole in both walls to make the outline of the two windows that I was going to have on this main wall. I didn't remove the gates just yet because I was really worried that everything was going to come tumbling down once I removed them. So I hopped onto a creative world and did some testing there, and everything turned out to be okay. So I went ahead with removing the gates from the windows. Even though I'd done all my testing and I knew it wasn't going to fall, it was still a bit of a tense moment because I could just picture all of this work I had done come tumbling down. Obviously it didn't, and now we're left with two cool looking windows, which I then went ahead with framing out with the wooden beams. I wanted to make these window frames stand out from the bricks, so I went along the inside of each of the window frames and filled them with the wooden beams as well. I like the separation effect that this gave me because having a full-on wall of brick can get a bit boring, so adding wood wherever you can to break it up a little bit really goes a long way. I then used the outside layer of the wall to carve in a little bit of extra detail using these columns. Again, I was a little bit worried about how the structure would be affected when I removed the gates, but through testing on my other world, I knew everything was going to be okay, so I went ahead and did that and added these fine wood logs to again add a little bit of extra detail, separate the brick from the wood and make the wood pop. And I was really happy with the end result. There's still a little bit of detail to add, but I was happy with the way things were going. The next thing to tackle was the overhanging part of the roof that I wanted to make. I wasn't really happy with how the stone wall just abruptly stopped at the top, so I wanted to make a much fancier overhanging roof with these little archways over the balcony. So I started off by building up a column reinforced with the wood iron beams and building an archway over to the existing roof on both sides of the balcony. I also continued the theme of having these wooden accents midway up the columns, and I think this made a nice little detail. Then to finish it all off, I added the 45-degree roof so that it made a peak at the top and then capped off the front of it with the 45-degree wooden beams. I think this started to polish things off and it made things tie together, and I was happy with how the front of this building was coming together. Just because the roof was so big, I added this support beam going from left to right near the top of the peak, and I also added this weird little eye detail because I felt like the top of the wall was a little bit empty. I think it fills the space pretty nicely, but I don't know. What do you guys think? As a final little detail to tie the balcony in with the columns down below, I added these vertical wooden beams. I think this helps to continue the flow of wood up into the building so that when the player enters through the gate, it slowly transitions into this much more wood heavy stone structure, if that makes any sense whatsoever. It took a long time, but I was finally happy with the front of the building. So I moved on to the inside and started planning out how the interior of this building was going to be laid out. First, I separated this little entrance hall from the main long great hall using a number of archways that the player will have to pass through in order to enter into the main big hall. Once the arches were built, I went about bringing the floor up to the level of the entrance hall. I was unable to terraform up to this level for some reason, so I reinforced using wooden iron beams and then placed down the stone flooring that I needed. And you've heard me say it loads of times, but I really think that level change is important for creating depth and detail, especially when you're passing into new areas and new rooms. So I added stairs and a level change into the Great Hall. It's only a height change of one stone floor, but it's enough to kind of let the player know they're entering into a new area. With that done, I then finished off the remaining two walls of the entrance hall, making sure to reinforce it with the gates, and I also made sure to do it too thick like I did on the other wall because I knew I was going to be adding detail to the outer wall. And with that done, we've come to the end of the video. So we've got the front facade and the entrance hall near enough done, and we know that in the next episode we're going to be continuing on into the Great Hall and hopefully making that look really cool. I'd just like to say thank you everyone for subscribing, thank you everyone for commenting their thoughts and suggestions, and if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe and leave a like. But for now, thank you all for watching this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.